Drew Morin, you serve as Director of Cyber Strategy at T-Mobile. You're responsible there for identifying emerging cybersecurity trends and regulatory policies and focusing on improving information security programs across the organization. Additionally, you've served in a variety of FCC advisory boards and industry working groups over the course of some 35 plus years in the cybersecurity realm. It's that experience and the insights that come from it that we're hoping to tap today. As a starting point, Drew, can you share your perspective on what you see as the core drivers for the cybersecurity challenge that we're facing generally, and in particular with regard to critical infrastructure?
We have become an information technology driven society. And especially in the United States and North America and a lot of the developed nations, we really rely on this information technology capability. And so it becomes that area where if you're interested in financial gain, like a criminal would be, it's an area that you want to figure out, how do I break into it? Okay, and it's a virtual break-in as opposed to, breaking into a door or a window. Similarly, from a nation-state perspective, it's rather interesting because it's a really challenging domain. Nation-states are able to put in programs designed to exploit vulnerabilities. And right now what ends up happening is if you exploit these vulnerabilities, you're typically doing it for gaining intelligence. It may be for gaining control of systems. It may just be for reconnaissance. All of these types of things have been done in the physical world, physical domain, if you will, for centuries. Now we're talking about something that's being done in the virtual domain. And so you've got these different types of actors who are using these different types of tools to attack, if you will, that information technology structure that drives everything that we do nowadays. And so that's the standpoint behind why we see these increases occurring, or this perception of increase, is because that's where the bad guys, the bad actors have moved. It's become a global attack capability.
Drew, so how then should we be addressing these risks posed by both criminal and nation-state actors?
But I think we have to look at cybersecurity right now in this environment holistically, which is it's got to be more than just a defense. There has to be a deterrence. Okay. The idea of somebody breaking into your house to steal something, there is a deterrence there. There's the rule of law. There are people who do the defense of that. There are people who actually investigate it and people who actually arrest. And there's a price to be paid for this criminal activity. We see that in some instances in terms of some of the criminal gangs that are operating. And there's been a lot more of international cooperation, collaboration to bring some of these gangs to justice, which is really impressive. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to put that same light on a nation state. And if the nation state actually is harboring some of these criminal gangs and are not a participant with like-minded countries, it becomes also a challenge to be able to bring them to justice. So the deterrence factor is, I think, a particularly challenging domain right now for cybersecurity. And that's one of the things that we really need to rely on. And we've made this point from an industry perspective and also in public-private partnership with government. We need to rely on the federal government. We need to rely on the international partnerships we have with other countries, their governments like-minded, to really band together and to set these norms and address these norms, and then to execute against them and to hold others responsible or hold them responsible for violating these norms. And there must be some kind of, if you will, an impact. There must be a price to pay, if you will, if folks violate these international norms of behaving in a cyber environment. So these are some of the things that we've been speaking with in terms of some of these working groups, public-private working groups, as well as industry experts providing information to share with decision makers, with policymakers. We want to be careful that we are allowing our free markets to be free and to execute, but also how do we partner best to be able to take the corrective actions that need to be taken in a positive way and not in a way that actually hamstrings our commercial industries. At the same time, if we're doing things, let's make sure they're the right things and they're things that are impactful, not just something that feels good and therefore I can say, look at what I did. It's more from the standpoint of something that is positively impactful to mitigating the threat environment, to managing the risk associated with it.
What about those nation states that choose not to cooperate on international norms?
Ultimately, if you're going to look at some kind of action on an international scale, they're going to be those that are going to stub their nose at. I don't think we're ever going to get North Korea, right, and at least not in the near term, to behave in this environment. Then again, they are relatively isolated in the international space currently, and I think that sanctions, things of that nature, are tools available to the international community to try to at least, if not encourage good behavior, to isolate bad behavior.
So you'd argue that we don't need universal collaboration on cyber norms for there to be value in these efforts.
It's never going to be perfect. It's not going to be complete. But what happens in a cyber environment, you're trying to reduce the risk. You're trying to find ways to mitigate those risks and to help provide a better environment to operate within. And that's what you can do from the standpoint of a policy in a political environment.
Okay, beyond, as you say, the policy and political environment, what needs to be done?
Obviously, there's a lot of technical things that we're doing. The identification of best practices, the ability to roll out new tools for doing cyber defense, detection, information sharing. These are all capabilities that we need to partner in, and we do. We have multiple public-private partnerships with the Department of Homeland Security, with NTIA, with NIST, with the FCC through their CISRIC. There's a lot of different public-private partnerships that have a positive impact in terms of reducing and mitigating these risks. Now, that being said, there's always going to be opportunities for more, and what we have to be careful too is that we take a sector-specific approach to this. We can't. It's a one-size-fits-all does not work in a cybersecurity environment. There are different types. I mentioned before, risk is all about likelihood and impact. And if you take a look at it, the impact of a cybersecurity ransomware attack on, like we said, on a gas pipeline recently, is going to be a lot different and probably even more impactful than perchance an impact on a facilities management company, and they may argue that it's the same type of impact. It's different impacts, and you have to have the measures for that specific sector's impact so that they can say, here's the most important things that we're concerned about from a cyber risk perspective. Vice a water treatment facility that might be very concerned about the control systems they have in place, or the management of dams or something of that nature. So once again, it's understanding the sector, what's important to the sector, and then tailoring the overall cybersecurity risk mitigation programs, partnerships, best practices to that sector's requirements and needs.
You referenced the positive impact of various public-private partnerships, including those with DHS, CISA, NIST, FCC, etc. Do you see any particular areas for improvement on the public sector side?
One of the challenges we continue to have is the idea of information threat sharing in a way that doesn't create a liability for private industry. Okay, and that's been a bit of a challenge because we've got certain protections, some of which are untested, but within that have been provided by the government. But there's also that challenge that you share some threat information, and it then is used by government to come back and fine you, because, oh, well, you had this incident, et cetera, et cetera. The point is, you want to encourage the information sharing in a controlled way. You don't want to discourage it.
You referenced that one size fits all doesn't work in cybersecurity. Beyond clear differences across industry sectors, should organizational size inform public sector outreach?
The challenge is you've got small, mid-sized businesses that do not have the amount of resources readily available to do this. The same is true of local government, tribal government, state government even. And having DHS be able to offer up these types of services and capabilities, offering up a voluntary acceptance of them doing some threat hunting on the network, or coming in and helping set up policies and programs to enable, offering up training to enable some of these small, mid-sized businesses is a tremendous help.
Beyond that, any other areas for improvement in information sharing?
So what we're talking about here, though, is that if that from the government to industry, there's this constant push and pull challenge is that a lot of the information that they get, the advanced information they get, is classified. And so they've got to find, there's got to be a way. We don't care that how you source the data. If you've got an indicator of compromise, something that says if you see this going to this IP address or these types of traffic on your network, you may be you may be under attack by XYZ variant malware. Get that out to us. There's got to be a faster way to get that information shared.
Okay, let's focus on the private sector side, especially critical infrastructure, a bit more if we could. In terms of addressing cybersecurity, what's working and not working there beyond information sharing?
Unfortunately, I can't really talk that much to the other sectors of the critical infrastructure providers. So what I have to do is kind of put the lens on of the communication sector and looking at what's working and what's not. I think what is working is the ability of our industry through our cybersecurity working groups to actually exchange information and about what we're seeing out there in the environment to figure out what can be done to improve our stance. If something comes out, we can share it through our communications ISAC, which is a DHS organization, Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and that distributes it to all of the community members. These types of things are working. They're good products. I think areas of improvement are always going to be a matter of nobody has infinite resources. So the areas of improvement are going to be how do we get those force multipliers, if you will. How do we partner with other activities, other agencies, other carriers, other industries to identify these potential threat vectors, and how do we share that risk mitigation capability? You'll find that the information technology and the communications technology sectors, we work together a lot because we're kind of codependent in that regard, especially as our networks move more and more towards IoT-centric, this fifth generation technology, which is going to be more cloud-based, that we're going to have the more commercial standard type hardware and equipment in there. We're going to become really a lot more codependent, if you will, on what happens. We have to ensure that our supply chain is providing us with products that are vetted or understood. And so I think one of those areas that we're all improving in right now is our supply chain risk management to try and address that. And we're doing that in partnership with our information technology organizations, as well as with those OEMs within the environment of communications technology. The other thing that we've done really well is leverage this virtuous cycle of identifying vulnerabilities, taking those vulnerabilities that are either identified within our own companies or through researchers or through other means, and providing those into our standards committees that are working through in the communication industry with 3GPP. There's an entire group, SA3, that's focused on security. Okay, and what we're doing is we feed in these challenges, these issues, these vulnerabilities, and so that as we define the specifications for this next generation and for the evolution of the next generation of communications, we're building into it those mitigations to protect against known, new, and discovered vulnerabilities as we proceed. I think that's something else that our communications industry has done a great job of doing.
There's always been the challenge of fast-paced movement of technology and services to market, with security often being an afterthought. It sounds like the communications sector, or at least elements of it, have been more proactive in that regard. Are there any lessons learned from your sector that could be shared with other sectors in this respect?
That's interesting. So first of all, yeah, I think the idea of security by design, or designing in security into new systems, that is something that has evolved. There's always been a consideration of security, but it's probably evolved more rapidly around the information protection side and the broader capabilities in the past 4G, 5G type of iterations. And in this most recent one, 5G, it's designed in from the ground up. And that's, I think, that process and that experience is something that should be adopted by all the critical information, all the critical infrastructure sectors, because the challenge that they're going to have in some of these sectors is they have a lot of what do I want to say? A lot of the technology they put into their systems are long-lived. Okay, you can have control systems that are put in place and have a 15 to 20-year life expectancy. And that's true, actually had historically been true of the communication sector. I think as we are more rapidly iterating, we're finding that these technologies, these generations of technology and architectures are iterating a little bit faster than that. So we've actually had the benefit of being able to learn the lessons of integrating security into the process up front. It's going to be it's a best practice. It's something that all of the critical infrastructure industries should be considering. How do I take the security threat information, feed it into my process, and build mitigations into my products and services as we go forward? Some are going to be able to adapt to it quicker than others. I think the other part of it is that security can't be an afterthought. It has got to be something that security has to have a seat at the table as you're figuring out your business objectives.
Drew, your sector has a strong focus on improving supply chain security. What do you see as the key strategies or approaches in that regard?
So the first thing is to understand you can't eliminate threats. Okay, right. Vulnerabilities are always going to happen, and exploits of those vulnerabilities will happen. So since you can't eliminate them, you basically have to use the idea of risk-based assessment so that you can prioritize how you're going to implement mitigating controls. And I think that's often lost on people who are not practitioners in cybersecurity. So when we take a look at this environment we're dealing with, supply chain is one area where we see threats. So you look at it and you say, okay, what is it in the supply chain? How do I mitigate these threats? How do I develop policies around these? And then how do I implement them in practice? So if I'm looking at supply chain risk management, capabilities that improve my provenance, my understanding of the birth to the delivery of the product that I'm getting from my suppliers. NTIA has been an advocate and developed a procedure around software bill of materials. And I think we're going to see this continue to gain acceptance in the markets. And that's an example of understanding where your software came from. What are the components that are in there? These are best practices that has been developed in partnership with industry and the government, and that is actually being rolled out. So that's an example, if you will, of a best practice that is focused on addressing a supply chain risk. If you have certain policies around, okay, my suppliers, I have a series of questionnaires that they need to complete and all of that, and those questionnaires are based on me understanding the risks and having looked at what are the highest priority risks, what are the lowest priority ones.
Drew, any closing message to decision makers in both the public and private sectors?
There's no such thing as what is the primary issue we're trying to address in cybersecurity. That's not a simple answer. What I would say is that there's a lot of excellent information sharing related activities that are currently ongoing. There's a lot of beneficial private-public partnerships between industry and government that are focused on advancing a shared understanding of this risk environment, of how we can mitigate these threats, and how we can collaborate to improve the cybersecurity status, if you will, the security status, risk mitigation status of all of industry and all of government. I think that as we continue to go down that path, we're going to see improvements and best practices generated that are going to continue to improve our status across the board. And I think ultimately, as the federal government focuses on supporting the arms that they have, not only internally facing, but also that can enable and support the critical infrastructure industries out there, and particularly focused on those that can use the help the most. Once again, I'm thinking about small, medium-sized businesses, state, local government, maybe the less sophisticated from an information technology perspective or communication technology perspective companies and organizations and critical infrastructure sectors. If they can really put that help where it's needed most,